Oh yeah, thanks so much, Stuart.
Yeah,
It's been a little bit since our last progress report, um, but not everybody knows what I know. So I'd love to just start with a little introduction of where you've been and how you got here.
sure. Yeah, it's kind of sitting in an interesting spot now. So my background has always been early stage startups. I've bounced between growth roles and product roles. Uh, my most recent in-house role, I've also started a couple of my own things, but my most recent in-house role was at arrows.to, where like growth ultimately, and that was sort of what really drove me down the HubSpot rabbit hole. I've sort of been a HubSpot user in different marketing roles previously, but and I didn't join Arrows thinking I was going to be deep in the HubSpot ecosystem because Arrows at the time was not HubSpot exclusive. But 6 months into me being there, we made the decision to pivot to HubSpot and HubSpot only. So as part of sort of leading growth there, ended up creating a lot of HubSpot content around specifically around customer success use cases and sort of this steal this workflow series. Um, and then for the last 6 months or so, I've been running my own thing. Again, somewhat differently to probably most folks in the HubSpot ecosystem. I work on sort of two things. One is ConnectedGTM, which is sort of independent brand sort of education around go-to-market use cases in HubSpot. So really tactical guides, newsletter, and LinkedIn. And then I also work with HubSpot ecosystem software companies on go-to-market uh, stuff, which generally pretty early stage, or at least early in the HubSpot ecosystem, which aren't necessarily the same thing company size wise, um, but yeah, very everything HubSpot. Probably 99% of what I do is HubSpot related, but not in the traditional sort of typical maybe solutions partner, servicing customers in HubSpot. Although I've certainly done a fair amount of that too.
Yeah, we can't really get away from that ever, can we? Always got to be digging into the tool.
Yeah.
But I think that goes a long way of what we're talking about today and kind of content and like experiential driven um, value that you can bring. Um, we hadn't talked, I don't think, prior to June of last year. And
Totally okay.
that was when the change, you were experiencing a change, rather unexpected, and we caught up. And you said you were trying to decide on which, basically business model you were gonna take on. Can you take us through that decision making process?
Yeah, so I had been doing my own thing before Arrow, so I was sort of it didn't take me a ton of time to be like, I'm gonna go do my own thing rather than join somewhere else. Um, and there's sort of I guess three sort of big buckets of like things you can go do, right? You go build a services business, you go build a product business, or build something in the middle, so a media e-type business. And one of the things that I think I liked about what I did at Arrows from a content perspective was that it was very sort of solve for the user, solve for the customer, uh, sort of use case driven stuff. And the tool is like a byproduct of like if you get deep enough in this, you're going to have a complex enough problem that you won't be able to do it with HubSpot by itself. So you'll need another tool. But one of the challenges whenever you're in a marketing role is you have a like the content is not the thing, right? The content is just a funnel to something in the worst terms possible. It's just a funnel to something else. You're not metric on the content, you're metric on pipeline or revenue or whatever. So that was sort of how I chose the sort of sit in the middle, build the independent media thing, was like do something that enables the content to be the product, and monetize directly, which has been interesting for sure, because a monetization is definitely an open question, I think. I've monetized two ways: direct member subscription, like paid member subscriptions, and then sponsored or featured content, primarily with HubSpot app partners. Um, but yeah, it's definitely it, it's definitely not the easiest business to scale monetization wise, or you need scale to for it to be really meaningful if that's your monetization model. Uh, but fortunately, services is a sort of the opposite of that, and that it's quick upfront but doesn't have the same scale or like long term benefit.
I know that. I know that feeling for sure. Um, so as you were deciding to go that route, a challenge we see so often in the HubSpot ecosystem is like how to get super clear on the who, right? Because
Yeah.
there's so many different people involved and all the problems that we hear about, including like the HubSpot ecosystem itself, partners, like, that whole stakeholder group. How did you go about, like, what was the first thing that came to mind as you were trying to figure that part out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is where I have sort of a different, maybe somewhat different angle than a lot of folks in the HubSpot ecosystem, and that essentially, like, because and maybe it actually isn't that different, but essentially, I was like, uh, who has been in a similar role as me? Who, like, what could I tell myself? Like, what could I have like produced for myself 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whatever, right? And so for me, that meant not folks with a HubSpot title. Typically, it's folks in a go-to-market role, whether that's marketing, sales, success, whatever, um, who are trying to solve, and it's either that person or the person who's like enabling that person, right? But you're trying to solve a business problem first. You're trying to solve, like, you almost don't care what the tool is. You're trying to solve the problem, and you know that you use HubSpot, right? Like, I mean, overlaying everything has to be you use HubSpot. Um, so pretty much everything starts from a sort of business case first. Is like how to do X in HubSpot. And that means that it's the person who is uh, trying to implement that for a go-to-market team, which often is somebody who, I mean, the reality of the HubSpot ecosystem is that most people are not ops people implementing HubSpot. They're in some other role where they're implementing it sort of on the side. So it's the person who, is in a go-to-market role who doesn't really have the time to go all the way into HubSpot or doesn't care to, um, and but wants to solve the business problem, right? So, and I think that there's obviously limits to how far you can actually solve that problem with content. Like, every business is different. There's always going to be a level where it's like, take this as a starting point or as a framework to sort of think through a problem, and then you have to modify and do whatever to fit your own specific case. But I think that the advantage of picking that, so that was sort of the first thing, was like, what do I know what to talk about? Like, some idea of like when I'm having a conversation with somebody, there's a sort of a starting point. But then the second is like, frankly, building a media type business, like, what is the valuable audience? And the thing that was pretty clear when I was at Arrows is like, uh there is nowhere HubSpot specific for a vendor to advertise to. Like, there's no big audience where you can be like, how do I reach the people who are going to, who are like thinking about tooling, thinking about systems, thinking about how do I improve process and push HubSpot further, um, with apps in one place, right? Like, that just doesn't exist. Like, sure, there's like RevOps communities or like non HubSpot specific communities, but from a like addressable, sponsorable market, it sort of doesn't exist, because you need the go to market person, because that's the person who has budget for, like, you at least need that buy-in, or like you need that, like, uh them to be involved. So that was sort of the overlay there, was like, try to do something that is more, and there's obviously overlap of like HubSpot providers and stuff, but the intent was to try to reach go to market roles, um more so than people who are purely in HubSpot roles.
Okay. So it sounds like a little bit of who can you help, but also maybe who can pay at the same
Yeah,
time.
I mean, you have to have some kind of, uh and I don't know that that necessarily informs the type of content that I create. I would say it does inform like topic selection, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Did you get, I mean, how was that first, month or two? Did you have Like some immediate traction? What were some key learnings?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, it was a lot of it was. I mean, the thing that is a bit of a fallacy, right, is it wasn't really month one. It was like month 36 or something, right? Um, so yes, it was new in the newsletter, but like there were hundreds of signups on day one, uh, because it was like a new thing that they already built the audience for, which I think is the sort of, I guess the lesson is like if you're wondering if you should start, you should probably start, because the best day is today. Um, but yeah, I was shocked how quickly folks came inbound from a sponsorship perspective, um, even with a pretty small audience. Because I mean, like if you compare, I mean, the audience now and the scope of like audiences that you would pay to advertise for it too is tiny, right? Like 1,800 people on the get the newsletter. It's not a big audience, but it is specific. And I think that the sort of the two learnings there, I think, are like anything that's good takes time. Um, and so the like day zero thing wasn't really day zero, but also uh the tighter you can be around, like the deeper that you can go with a specific group, the easier everything gets, right? Because you both it's both easier to talk about like who is this for, but it's also easier to uh, solve like deeper problems, which means you build a deeper relationship, which means that it's more attractive on the other side to folks who want to reach that audience. Um, there are definitely drawbacks to sponsored content though.
Take me there. What did what what are some of the drawbacks?
You no longer, I mean, like the way that I've done it, I would say is pretty aggressive for the amount of control which I give people who are sponsoring, which is zero. Um, like sure, I'll share a draft with them. Like I'm not necessarily going to change anything based on what they say. Um, and they know that, and I think that that's like in a lot of ways is like actually a benefit. Is that they and this is definitely true of app partners who are less embedded in the ecosystem, which is like we have a tool, we don't really know what it can do in HubSpot. Can you figure it out and turn it into content? Which is always interesting. But yeah, I would say that's the biggest drawback is like you're just on somebody else's calendar, on somebody else's um like you're limited by the tool, right? In the sense that if it's purely a HubSpot constraint, then there are interesting ways that you can like work around things, or there's probably some hidden HubSpot feature which you can use to uh, solve a problem. And if it can't do it, then I mean people seem to be okay with that. But it's hard to I think it's harder to go to an app partner and be like, yeah, this use case doesn't work because your integration sucks. Like they don't want you to like they don't want you to have to work around the or like yeah they don't want to have to work around the integration, right? Because that sort of defeats the purpose of the integration. So certainly I think that's been a big learning for me going into this year is both look for longer term partnerships. I think just because there's less sort of fatigue on like this is a feature piece sponsor piece of content, like it's different every week, which I think like my intent has not been because it's not an ad, it's a like full playbook, is more around like this is a thing that you could use to address this use case, rather than like this is necessarily an endorsement directly of like this is the best tool for this thing, right? It's like a tool for this thing. I'm curious to feedback of how that comes off. But my sense is that it's worse for the audience the more partners you have. Um, and then also just being more picky, I think, which is kind of it's like there's always a little bit of a balance there. I think early it's like you want the validation that people will pay for a thing, but it's a double-edged sword in the sense that if it's not a great partner, then it can have unintended consequences. Like I think like the most recently published thing that I've worked on was with Contrast, the like webinar tool, and that one lines up really well because it was a tool that we used at Arrows. They're clearly building for the HubSpot ecosystem. Like they pretty explicitly uh, don't care about like, does this drive, like they're not measuring direct demand from it. It's like, does this get us deeper into the HubSpot ecosystem in terms of people understanding how the tool integrates and how it fits, which I think is sort of best case for any kind of integration versus like, yeah, we're hoping you get this many impressions and this many, like we're tracking traffic to a website, which for a B2B product is kind of absurd anyway, but it's a whole separate topic.
So is that a challenging conversation in terms of like what value that they're investing in, like as opposed to what normal people are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants, uh, usually the telltale sign is like, well, it's, I guess it's not 100%, but like, how much do you care about UTM parameters? Is like, if people don't care about UTM parameters, they're probably, and nothing against UTM parameters. Like, sure, if you're going to put a link in something, put UTM parameters. LinkedIn disguises it anyway. Nobody's going to see it. Um, but if they lead with like, we want traffic, it's probably not like it's like it's sort of a misalignment of like how content like this, like authoritative type content works. Like it doesn't become an authority by linking you to a product, right? It becomes authority by like being valuable first, and then people find the product later, or like, oh, by the way, there's a product that fits with this.
Right.
So yeah, I've definitely had those conversations where people are like, how many leads can we expect for this? And like, I don't know. That's not a conversation we're gonna have.
Right. I think like one of those things only in this ecosystem uh, probably could we be afforded that somebody will take us up on the collaboration, right? Like if you can have that collaborative spirit, it just like the content works better, the reaction is
Yeah,
better. Because it's pretty hard to tell, like even when you lead it, like you can tell like there's a lot of integrity in your content and you
thanks.
stay the course, for your audience. And I know a lot of people appreciate that. So it's been fun to watch the journey. But I don't get to take up all the time today like we have in our past conversations. We're gonna open it up to some Q&A. If we've got any questions from the audience, please unmute yourself and jump on camera.
Hey, Stuart. Thanks
Hey,
for
Ben.
for doing this. This is super exciting. Our first group chat. Appreciate having you on and you sharing your insights. One question that has come up for me is when in the process of creating a piece of content, like you land on what the hook is or like what the title of the piece of content is. There's some discussion and some debate. Like, is that the first step that you decide like, hey, I'm going to create a piece of content that specifically addresses this? Or does that emerge over the course of sort of creating something?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think generally I try to write the title first or the hook first. Um, I think more so than that, I try to test the hook first. I think it really depends on what the format of the content is. Like some formats are just, you have to invest more upfront, and some you don't. Um, but I think thinking about it through like I think the easiest way to get a good hook is to uh and this isn't sponsored, but if you use Fathom, it's really easy. Just go ask Fathom if you're recording calls for all the questions that you were asked in your last like client meeting, and just answer those questions. Because if one person's asking the question, chances are other people have the answer to that question. And if your answer came from you and an experience, and I think call like, and this is again is like a rabbit hole, but I think that especially this year, people who aren't starting from a sort of owned experience or like internal, like originating their own content, are just going to really struggle. Like everything that isn't that is going to be in an LLM and is going to look like everything else. And I think cool. Generally, when people talk, they talk much more candidly and sort of, um, you know, the better storytellers. They give more examples. It's just like people are just generally better at talking. So if you have that question, then you can look at your response and you reference, maybe another project that you did, or this is the contrasting approaches that you could have taken to solving this problem, like all of that kind of stuff is great when it comes to formulating, like, okay, the question might be the sort of the topic, but the response could be the hook, right? Like if you let's say I want to give a real example, but because I can't think of a good one, but let's say that you were asked a question and you led with like, well, I would do it this way because of X. The because of X is probably a good hook, right? It's like the last time, like I migrated X thousand records from Salesforce and something broke, right? Something catastrophic, like is a great hook, right? And then you follow it with like, I was asked this question on a call with a client. Don't name the client, but just like that's social proof you have clients. And then here's what I recommended instead. And you very quickly have like here's this relatable problem that like you have like risk avoidance, you have social proof that you actually know what you're talking about because you've done it before, and then you're able to lay out a solution. And that sort of approach, like taking things from real life questions, it's just it's much easier because if you're having calls with people, what the questions were. But then you can do a lot with that, right? Like to go beyond hooks, you can go search LinkedIn for that same question or like keywords around that question. Who else is talking about this thing? Go answer those questions with your answer, right? You now have a ton of distribution. Go search that question in Reddit. Go search that question in the HubSpot community. Just find all the places where you can use your own point of view on that problem and just open up like you're still talking about the same thing, but you just open up the top. A little unrelated to hooks. The place where I would say the only place where I would say don't start with the hook really is if and even this is a little bit about a hook, is if you're experiencing the problem yourself, right? And the hook is sort of very obvious in that case. It's like, I mean, you see it all over LinkedIn and they're kind of annoying, but like I spent X hours doing this thing. And I'm not saying go rewrite that, but like if you're experiencing the problem yourself, you don't need to lead with the question. You can lead with your experience. Like I've invested time in this. The other thing that I would say on hooks is questions generally don't work very well as hooks. And that's a little counterintuitive. Like a lot of people will say questions, and like that's again my experience. I think the reason they don't work well as hooks is they very quick, like, and I mean they can work well in a very specific type of hook, but generally I would say questions don't work well because they very quickly let people opt out. Right? Like if you ask a question where the answer is yes or no, and somebody says no, they scrolled, right? So it's much like that's saying like the easiest way to get people to talk on the internet is to say something you know is wrong and have people argue it. So I think like having a closed statement generally is much better as a hook. Where it can work as a hook is if you very intentionally want a specific audience, right? If you want, like, let's say that you want, I don't know, you're trying to poll your audience, and you only want HubSpot solutions partners. Hey, are you a HubSpot elite partner? Well, you're not going to answer that if you aren't, right? So, anyway, a little ramble on hooks, but
that's awesome.
Yes, generally I would start with the hook first.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stuart.
Hey, Stuart, how are you?
Jason, good. Yeah.
I'd love some guidance on your process. Like when you're thinking about just sort of meta high level, I need to create some content. How do you think about your process? What are the steps to your process?
Like it's a bad day, I haven't posted anything, or I feel like I have to ship something.
Sure. I need to, yeah, right. I need to create. I've got a project. I've got a deadline.
Yeah.
I've got to get into creator mode.
Yeah.
How do you go from not creating to creating?
Yeah. So a couple of things. What have I already created that's related? I mean, again, the like month zero versus month 36 thing or whatever is like, if I need something in a pinch, like what have I already posted that I can change the hook on, or even not change the hook on and just repost? Like if it worked before and it was good, it will probably work again. So that's like step one. It's like, don't reinvent the wheel, copy what already worked. Step two, and this is actually a thing that I did a lot early in creating on LinkedIn, and I still do occasionally if I get stuck, is go find somebody's content where the quality of the content is objectively good. And like there's a ton of candidates for this, right? Like Dave Gerhardt or Chris Walker, or like, like a bunch of Emily Kramer stuff is always great. Like, go find somebody who writes well. Make sure you have again, start with a question. Like, what are the questions that I want to answer? Ideally, it's a question you've been asked by one person, but then take that question and the post or whatever it is from somebody else and rewrite the post with your topic. So like literally just like swap it. Like it's like the theme here is, how do you make tasks an editing task, not a writing task? How do you go from, the thing that already exists, if the hook is, I mean, like literally just rewrite it word for word. I don't like, we can pull it up, I guess we could do it, but that, I think that's sort of the biggest shortcut, because you're sort of doing two things there. Like, A, you get to something that you can ship quickly, but also you start to understand what the patterns are in good writing or in things that work. So that'd be the second thing. But in terms of my own process, I think that, and certainly I'm pushing this way more and more, is what is the fastest way to have a thing which shows, like, have a complete thing, which often is video, is like, oh, I mean, if you're in a portal, right, like literally just like record yourself walking through the thing that you want to talk about. Or if it's a document, record yourself walking through the document that you have, and then take that transcript and pull out, like, okay, you can usually just, again, like same theme, writing to editing, right? Like start from a transcript rather than starting from a blank page. Take the transcript and just mock it up or like edit it to become a post, right? Like, oh, this is the thing that I talked about at the end. Like, what if I put that up top? That's a good hook. If I break this ramble into bullet points, does that work better than as a solo thing? So a lot of my own content sort of starts that way. It's like either from a call where I have a transcript, or it's from I have an idea, I'm going to sort of record a video, like record a walkthrough so that I get a transcript and then go from there. And for formatting specifically, I just rewrite examples. I think that the biggest lesson is, or the biggest thing, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but it's like, try to write how you talk, which usually means chop it up. It's okay. Like, I typo stuff all the time, and that's just the way it is. Like, it's fine that it's messy. It's sort of better that way, I think, in a lot of ways.
Great. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you so much stopping by today,
Of course.
Stuart. Couldn't think of a better way to start off our group chats, with Profoundly. And we hope you'll consider coming back. There's so much more to talk about when it comes to content businesses. So yeah, we appreciate you, man.
Yeah, of course. This was fun. And we have separate questions or thoughts, feel free to ping me. Always happy to talk through this stuff. I will say that I think, like, whether you're starting a content business or not, I think it's 2025. Every business is a content business. I don't know that every company or every business is a media business, but certainly content is the thing that makes it much, much easier online.
Certainly does. Well said. Well, until next time, everybody, have a great day.
See everybody.